Direct costing and full costing. Introduction. Cost is an amount paid to acquire goods and services. Cost allocation is the process of identifying costs to cost objects. Cost object is anything for which a separate measurement is required: product, service, project, department, etc. Type of costs. There are variable costs and fixed costs. Variable costs depend on the level of production. Variable cost is a cost that changes in proportion to changes in the related level of total activity or volume. Fixed costs do not depend on the level of production. Fixed cost is a cost that does not change in total when changes the related level of activity or volume. There are also direct costs and indirect costs. Direct costs is any cost that is related to the cost object and can be traced to the cost in an economically feasible way. And indirect cost is indirectly related to the cost object, but cannot be traced to it in an economically feasible way and is allocated to the cost object using a cost allocation method. Costs may be simultaneously direct and variable, materials for a product, direct and fixed, equipment depreciation for a department, indirect and variable, indirect manufacturing labor, indirect and fixed, distribution overheads, administrative costs. Variable costing method and full costing method. Variable costing method, or direct costing method, collects to a cost object only costs that are related to this particular cost object, variable costs and fixed costs, and can be traced to it in an economically feasible way, for example, raw materials and direct labor. Variable costing method highlights: the first level contribution margin is the difference between revenues and all variable direct costs. The second level contribution margin is the difference between the first level margin and the specific fixed cost. The contribution margin can be expressed as total, as an amount per unit, as percentages. The first contribution margin helps managers understand how a product covers fixed costs, what products should be preferred to increase companies' profit. Planning decisions about production include an analysis of the first contribution margin as total and per unit, and of the second contribution margin too. Full costing method collects to a cost object all direct and indirect costs, variable cost and fixed costs. Direct costs are related and traced to it in a cost-effective way. Indirect costs are allocated to the cost object using a cost allocation method. There are many cost allocation methods. The first one is single cost allocation base. Only a factor is the parameter to allocate a group of indirect costs to a cost object, for example, units sold. The second one is multiple cost allocation base. More factors are used as a common denominator for linking an indirect cost or group of costs to a cost object. For example, indirect manufacturing labor costs under direct labor costs, and depreciation cost under machine hours. The third one is cost centers method. Indirect costs are added to different cost centers as business organizational entity with a specific function. Type of cost centers. Real centers, organizational material units such as purchasing division, sale departments, etc. Non-real centers, organizational non-material units such as buildings management center, which collects all costs for rent, maintenance and eating expenses. Cost centers can be production centers, in which all products are manufactured or processed. Auxiliary centers. They provide measurable services to other centers, for example, the maintenance centers. Production overhead services centers. They provide non-measurable services to production centers, for example, research and development department. Functional centers. They include all administrative, commercial, and personal areas. The main phases to calculate the cost of a product are to divide direct and indirect costs, to allocate direct costs to products, production, auxiliary, and functional centers, to overturn the costs of production overhead services centers to other cost centers, to overturn the cost of auxiliary centers to the centers which use their services, to overturn the costs of functional centers to the cost object, to overturn the costs of production centers to the cost object. Cost frame. Direct cost or prime cost is the sum of direct raw materials, direct manufacturing labor, and other direct manufacturing. If you add production overheads to prime cost, you have manufacturing cost. By adding non-production overhead costs, you have full cost. By adding imputed cost, you have economic cost.